So welcome back to the Floriani Software Fundamentals video series on FTCU. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. And in this section we're going to be covering the Properties box. The Properties box is located at the upper right hand corner of your screen, and it's probably one of the most useful things in the software because this is how we adjust and control the properties of not only our entire design but the elements that make up that design. Now, what this box will show you depends on what you have selected, or in this case, what we don't have selected, because we don't have anything selected. So when nothing is selected, this shows us the design notes that we can type in about this design. So we could put in here that this was a cherub and that we liked it on a certain fabric, or whatever other kind of notes we want to put in here. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that the only type of file that's going to remember what you put in here so you can see it over and over again is your WAF file. These notes will be lost when you change it to a stitch file. They'll be lost in the stitch file, but they will still be in the WAF file, assuming you followed my advice and you remember to save it. We're not going to put any design notes in here, but watch what happens when I click on an element. So if I click on this fill right here, this cadmium, you will see here that it tells me that it's a fill, and you can see I have all these tabs along the top here, and I can tell it's a fill because down here in my sequence view it tells me it's a fill, but right here in my first tab it says this is the main fill tab, and the fill type is standard, and under my standard patterns I have a variety of different things I could choose. So if I click that drop down, I could select a different style of pattern for this, and we'll get into that later, but I could select different stitch length, different density. Here's my underlay tab. If I wanted to change what the underlay was like here, I could change to a gradient fill if I wanted to. I could change the push and pull compensation. I could split this if it was a satin. And if you run out of space here, which you will, you can see these little scroll icons here, and white means you can't scroll anymore, black means you can. So I'm going to scroll right a little bit. In fact, I'll scroll all the way over. And the next one is my commands tab. So this is where I would control my start and end commands, you know, whether I want to start normally and have a trim at the end or whatever, and whether I want a tie-in or tie off at the end, and what kind of tie-in and tie-offs I want. And here's my general tab. So this talks about the connection end for the edges of this design, and we'll talk about short stitches at some other point, but this is kind of a useful thing. And the main thing I want to show you here is the transform tab. Now we're going to be using the transform a lot, and what this does is it tells you the width and the height in inches of this element. And the reason it's showing you in inches is because right here I can change between inches and millimeters. So if I wanted to see it in millimeters, I just have to click that button, and now I see it in millimeters. To go back to inches here, that puts me back in inches. I could also rotate this design by a certain amount by putting a value in here. So that would allow me to rotate it. But that's what the properties box is all about. Now, one thing to understand about the properties box is if I go back to the fill tab here, and let's say I change the fill type to a random fill, nothing is going to happen over here in my design until I click the apply button. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply, and now it will change that fill pattern. So if I click off it, you can see now I've got a random stitch pattern in there instead of the snake skin that it originally was. If I want to go back to snake skin, I could either use my undo, or I could come back here to my properties box and I could change back to snake skin, remembering to click apply, and it would put the design back where it was. So that's your properties box. Now sometimes, depending on your particular screen size, this apply button might be hidden, and usually that's because your sequence view is up here over the top of it, and it's not actually on my screen letting me do that. But sometimes your sequence view will be hiding this apply button. So all you need to do is hover over the top of your sequence view title bar there until your cursor looks like that. Click and drag it down a little bit until you can see the apply button. And the amount of space this takes up depends a lot on what's going on in here. So some of these take up more space than others. So sometimes you might see the apply button, sometimes it might be hidden. But again, the way to reveal it is to drag the top of your sequence view down so that you can see it. So that is your properties box in a nutshell. It has tabs here, and again, these tabs will vary based on what you have selected. So watch what happens if I select the entire design. I'm just going to drag a box around the entire design. You will see that I have more tabs now. So I've got fill tab, I've got a run tab, I've got still an underlay tab. Here's a column tab. This is for the satin stitches. I still have a gradient tab, a push and pull, a split, commands, general, and probably the most useful in this particular mode is the transform tab, because this allows me to transform the entire design numerically. So for example, if I knew I needed it to be 3 inches high, I could come in here and I could overtype the 3.75 to 3, and it would change the height. Now before I do that, I just want you to take note of this box right here, maintain aspect ratio. What this does when it's checked, and that's the default, is that if I change one of these, either the height or the width, it's actually going to change the other one proportionally, so the proportions of my design stay intact. If for some reason I just wanted to stretch it out a little bit higher or make it a little squatter without affecting the width, I would uncheck maintain aspect ratio, and then I could just change one independent of the other. I can also change it by a percentage. If I wanted to make it 120% bigger or 80% smaller or whatever I wanted to do, I could change that over here. But let's do what I was talking about. Let's change it to 3 and click apply, and you will see that that will change the size of my design. So now you can see it got smaller and it's exactly 3 inches high. So that is your properties box. Remember that nothing happens over here until you click apply over here.